April 29, 1945. The air outside Munich is heavy. It's not the familiar sharp smell of gunpowder, a smell the men of the U.S. 45th Thunderbird Infantry Division had come to know as intimately as their own sweat. This is something else, something ancient, sweet, and rotten. The men are combat veterans, but they are unprepared. They have stormed the beaches at Anzio, fighting inch by bloody inch. They have endured the frozen hell of the Vosges Mountains and the brutal Hausstehaus fighting in Aschenfonberg. They are survivors of nearly 500 days of combat, from Sicily to the heart of Germany. They believe they have seen the absolute worst of war. They are wrong. As they approach the industrial complex on the edge of the placid town of Dachau, they see a train. It's a long one, 39 open-top cattle cars parked on a rail siding just outside the main camp walls. At first it's just a train, then the wind shifts. The stench hits them like a physical blow, a sickening, overpowering miasma of human decomposition, chloride of lime, and excrement. The men gag, pulling their jacket collars over their noses. This is what they find. They call it the death train. It had arrived from Buchenwald days earlier. Inside, piled 3 and 4 deep, are over 2,300 human bodies. They are not the bodies of soldiers. They are skeletons draped in the remnants of striped prison uniforms. They are men, women, and children, contorted in the final agonies of starvation, typhus, and suffocation. Their eyes are open, their mouths are frozen in silent screams. For the GIS, who had just been fighting a conventional army, this is a profound psychological break. This is not war. This is an industrial slaughterhouse. One of the first men on the scene, a young lieutenant from the 45th, reels back and vomits. His face, pale with shock, quickly flushes with a dark crimson rage. He racks the bolt of his M1 Garand. The sound, that familiar kutching, is metallic, sharp, and final. In the distance, through the camp's main gate, his comrades are shouting. They have found the camp's guardians. They have found the SS. And the SS, unbelievably, are now trying to surrender. The image of the American soldier in World War II is one of history's most iconic and enduring. He is G.I. Joe. He's the liberator of Paris, a smiling farm boy from Iowa handing out chocolate bars and chewing gum to ecstatic Dutch children. He is the face of the good war, a citizen soldier drafted from a decent, law-abiding society, fighting an absolute and undeniable evil. He is the hero, protected morally and legally by the armor of the Geneva Conventions. He is, in the simplest terms, the good guy. But what happens when that good soldier is pushed past the breaking point? What happens when the liberator, in the span of 30 minutes, is forced to witness an evil so profound, so systematic, that it defies all human language? What happens when he is forced to stare directly into the abyss, and then finds the architects of that abyss, well-fed and arrogant, walking towards him with their hands in the air, asking for mercy? Because what happened in the coal yards, watchtowers, and ditches of the Dachau concentration camp on that Sunday afternoon was not an isolated incident. It was not a statistical anomaly. It was the horrific, inevitable climax of an unspoken and illegal policy, a simmering, righteous revenge that had been building for nearly 2 years. It was a total breakdown of military discipline, a spontaneous act of mass execution, that the United States Army would then deliberately and systematically try to bury for nearly half a century. This is not a story about the cold, systematic, state-sponsored cruelty of the Soviet Gulag, where over 1 million German prisoners would disappear into the ice. This is a different, more personal, and perhaps more troubling story. It is a story about hot-blooded battlefield justice, about the good war's darkest secret. How did the liberators, for a few dark, bloody hours, become executioners? This is the story that shatters the clean, simple, black-and-white myth of the good war. It is the story of the Biscari massacres, the Chinon reprisals, and the Dachau liberators' paradox. These are the uncomfortable, ugly events that the U.S. Army classified as secret, moments where American soldiers, men just like any other, executed Axis prisoners of war in cold blood. We are not dealing in rumor. We are going to dig into the declassified investigation files, specifically the U.S. 7th Army's report investigation of alleged mistreatment of German guards at Dachau. We will read the private secret diaries of General George S. Patton, the man who personally buried the truth. And we will listen to the sworn first-hand testimonies of the men who were there, the men who pulled the triggers and the officers who tried to stop them, the truth about what happens when righteous anger boils over into brutal, lawless revenge will challenge everything you thought you knew about the American soldier. If you believe history is found in the difficult, complicated details, stick with us. To understand the moment the system broke, we must first understand the system itself. The protagonist of this complex story is the average American GI. In 1941, he was a farmer from Iowa, a college student from Ohio, a factory worker from Detroit, or a high school kid from Brooklyn. He was drafted, or he enlisted into an army that, unlike its enemies, was obsessively built on a foundation of law. He was issued pamphlet after pamphlet. He sat through endless lectures on the 1929 Geneva Conventions. He was taught explicitly the rules of land warfare. His training was brutal, designed to make him a killer, but it was just as insistent on making him a lawful killer. The rules were clear. Prisoners of war were to be disarmed, tagged, searched, and immediately sent to the rear. They were not to be humiliated. They were not to be abused. They were certainly not to be killed. General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself issued a clear, theater-wide directive. The humane treatment of prisoners is a matter of military honor. Failure to do so is a base betrayal of the cause for which we fight and will be punished. To disobey this was not just wrong. It was a court-martial offense, plain and simple. The villain he was fighting against was not just Germany. It was Nazism. And its purest, most distilled, and most hated form was the Schutzstaffel, the SS. In the mind of the average GI, a critical life-or-death distinction was made. The Wehrmacht, the regular German army, were soldiers. They were the enemy. They were professionals. They were Krauts. But they were, for the most part, seen as men doing a job just like them. The SS were something else entirely. They were a demonic pantheon. They were the Allgemeinses, the political thugs. They were the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile murder squads who had already exterminated over 1 million people in the East. They were the SS-Tenkopfverband, the Death's Head units, the men who, by choice, ran the concentration and extermination camps. And they were the Waffen-SS, the armed SS, the fanatical, elite combat divisions who fought with a suicidal brutality and ideological fervor that the GIS found both terrifying and infuriating. These men, recognizable by their skull insignia or the double lightning bolt runes on their collars, were not seen as soldiers. They were seen as monsters, the physical embodiment of the evil they were all there to destroy. This created the internal flaw. The crack in the GI's moral armor was not sadism. It wasn't malice. It was something far more human, far more relatable, and far more dangerous: righteous fury. It was a deep-seated, justifiable, and white-hot belief that this specific enemy, the SS, was so fundamentally evil, so far beyond the pale of human morality, that they had forfeited their right to the protections of civilized warfare. This flaw, this righteous rage, was not just an abstract emotion. It would soon be given form, and a tacit green light, by one of America's most famous and profane generals. The transformation of the American GI from soldier to avenger did not begin in the snows of Normandy or the ashes of Dachau. It began over a year earlier under the hot, unforgiving sun of Sicily. The operation was Husky, the Allied invasion of Italy in July 1943. The Gs of the 7th Army, particularly the men of the 45th Thunderbird Division, were, for the most part, green. They were about to get their first taste of combat, and their commander, General George S. Patton, gave them a terrible formative burden. Patton was a master motivator, a believer in blood and guts. His words dripped with a visceral contempt for the enemy. In a series of blistering speeches to his officers and men before the landings, he roared, "When you meet the enemy, you will kill him. We are going to kill them by the bushel." And then he crossed a line that would haunt his army for the rest of the war. He reportedly told his officers, "If they, the enemy, surrender when you're 200 or 300 yards from them, to hell with them. Don't take prisoners. I don't want a bunch of prisoners sitting around. I want to get the hell onto the objective." Patton would later claim he was being metaphorical, that he was just trying to instill a killer instinct, to overcome the natural reluctance of civilized men to kill. But the men on the front lines, their blood up, about to jump into the unknown, did not hear a metaphor. They heard a green light. They heard a direct order from Old Blood and Guts himself. This led directly and immediately to the Biscari massacre. On July 14, 1943, just 4 days after the landings, troops of the 180th Infantry Regiment, 45th Division, captured a mixed group of 73 Italian and German prisoners near the Biscari airfield. A sergeant named Horace T. West, a 33-year-old from Oklahoma, was ordered to march 37 of these prisoners to the rear. 10 minutes later, sounds of a machine gun echoed through the olive groves. Sergeant West returned to his company commander alone and reported that he had executed all 37 prisoners. When his shocked commander asked why, West, a teetotaler known for carrying a Bible, calmly stated, I was just following orders I heard from the general. On the exact same day, in a separate incident, a captain named John T. Compton, commander of C Company, 179th Infantry, frustrated by prisoners who he believed had been sniping at him after trying to surrender, ordered his men to line up another 36 prisoners in a ditch. An execution squad was formed and they were all shot down. The army, to its credit, found out. These were clear, undeniable war crimes. Compton and West were arrested and put on trial. But then Patton intervened. In his secret private diary, Patton fumed. He wrote, "On August 12th, I told the Inspector General to find the men not guilty, as I did not want to besmirch the name of the 7th Army. It is an awful thing to try men for murder when they have killed the enemy. We are holding the sons of bitches by the nose, and we can't stop to kick them in the ass." Patton's influence was decisive. Captain Compton, who gave the order, argued he was following the spirit of Patton's command. He was acquitted and transferred. Sergeant West, who pulled the trigger, was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But Patton's staff quietly commuted the sentence. West was stripped of his rank and sent home, his military career over. But he would never serve a day in prison for the murder of 37 unarmed men. The crime was effectively and deliberately swept under the rug. The message was sent, not in an official memo, but it was understood. Killing prisoners was wrong. But not that wrong, not if you were angry enough. This was the seed. The second and heaviest burden was placed on the GIS in the coldest winter in living memory. December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. The German offensive smashed through the American lines in the Ardennes, creating panic, chaos, and desperation. The weather was brutal, the fighting savage. And then came the news that would change the soul of the American army. On December 17th, near a quiet crossroads in Belgium called Bognes, better known as Malmedy, SS troops of Kampfgruppe Peiper, an elite, fanatical unit from the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, captured over 100 American soldiers. These were not frontline infantry. They were men from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. They were technicians, surveyors, and support staff. They surrendered. The SS men, under the command of Joachim Peiper, marched them into a frozen, snow-covered field. And then, without warning, they opened fire with machine guns and pistols. 84 Americans were murdered in cold blood. A few survivors managed to escape by playing dead for hours in the freezing snow, later telling the world exactly what had happened. When American forces retook the field days later, they found the frozen, contorted bodies. They found that some of the dead had been executed at point-blank range, a single bullet hole in their forehead as the SS men walked among the wounded, finishing them off. The news of the Malmedy massacre spread through the Allied armies like a virus. This was not propaganda about Nazi brutality. This was a documented, confirmed fact with 84 bodies to prove it. A psychological wire snapped in the collective mind of the U.S. Army. From that moment on, a new, unofficial, and completely illegal order began to circulate by word of mouth in combat units all across the front. Take no SS prisoners. It was repeated in chow lines, whispered in foxholes, and barked by NCOs before an attack. It was a promise of vengeance. This new rule was not an abstract threat. It was implemented almost immediately, in the hot-blooded fury of revenge. The first climax of this rage occurred on New Year's Day, 1945. Less than 2 weeks after the Malmedy bodies were discovered, near the Belgian village of Chinon. Men from the American 11th Armored Division were locked in a brutal house-to-house fight with German Volksgrenadiers. The word Malmedy was on everyone's lips. An internal, classified after-action report from the 11th Armored Division, unearthed decades later, stated it plainly and chillingly: "Our troops are killing all Nazis on sight. About 120 German supermen have been eliminated. No prisoners were taken. What really happened at Chinon was a direct, tit-for-tat reprisal." GIS, enraged by their own losses and the news from Malmedy, rounded up dozens of German prisoners. The exact number is lost to the chaos of the battle, but eyewitness accounts from American soldiers themselves tell the story. They herded the prisoners into a field and simply shot them down. Historians estimate the number at 60, perhaps 80 men. It was Malmedy in reverse. A war crime born from the rage of another war crime. No one was ever charged. The U.S. Army's official history does not mention it. The incident was simply absorbed by the snow and the fog of war. This was the new, brutal reality. This brings us back to the gates of hell. The men of the 45th Thunderbird Division pouring into the Dachau complex on April 29, 1945, are not the same green troops from Sicily. They are now hardened veterans. They carry the institutional memory of Boscari and Patton's tacit approval. They carry the burning, personal, and immediate fury of Malmedy and Chinon. And now they are walking past the death train with its 2,300 corpses. They are walking past the gas chambers cynically disguised as brasbad showers. They are walking past the crematoria with their doors still open, past piles of human ash and skeletal limbs. And most importantly, they are met by the survivors, the 32,000 Muselmänner, living skeletons who crawl towards them, kissing their boots, weeping with a joy so profound it looks like agony. In that moment, the Gias are confronted with a level of evil they had never, in their worst nightmares, conceived of. And then they find the guards. About 120 SS men had remained in the camp. Some were Waffen-SS's frontline troops from a Hungarian unit, wounded and assigned to the garrison. Others were the camp's regular guards, these Stodenkopf men, the architects of this suffering. A few try to fight back. Most, seeing the gig is up, try to surrender. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, the 27-year-old battalion commander, is desperately trying to maintain control, but his men are a powder keg, and the fuse has been lit. One of his officers, a lieutenant, gathers a group of captured SS men. He marshes them to a coal yard next to a high brick wall. Other Gias join, shoving more captured SS men into the group. There are now 50 or 60 prisoners, hands in the air, lined up against the wall. A machine gunner from I Company, a 19-year-old named Private William C. Curtin, sets up his .30 caliber machine gun and aims it at the unarmed men. A lieutenant shouts an order. To this day, no one agrees on what was said. Some heard, "Let him have it." Others heard, "Don't fire." It didn't matter. Private Curtin opened fire. The deafening, uninterrupted roar of the .30 caliber echoed off the brick wall. It was a torrent of lead chewing through the line of men. In seconds, it's over. The gun stops. The coal yard is silent except for the moans of the wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks, hearing the gunfire, sprints to the scene. He is apoplectic with rage. He draws his .45 pistol and fires it into the air, screaming for his men to stop. He physically kicks Private Curtin off the machine gun, grabbing him by the collar. "What the hell are you doing?" He screams. "Stop! Stop firing!" Sparks' officers wade into the pile of bodies. Some, seeing the wounded, fire coups de grace into them, either to end their suffering or to finish the job. At least 17 SS men are dead in the coal yard. Many more are wounded. But it wasn't the only incident. The coal yard was a collective public breakdown. Elsewhere in the sprawling 80-acre camp, the justice was more personal. As the GIs fanned out, they found SS guards hiding in the towers, in ditches, in the barracks. These were not firefights, these were executions. A small group of GIs from the 42nd Rainbow Division, arriving at the same time, found 4 SS guards who had surrendered to their lieutenant. As the SS men came down from their watchtower, hands raised, a GI stepped forward and shot all 4 of them. Just like that. An Army photographer, Arlen B. Musser, captured the bodies seconds later. Private John Lee, of the 42nd's 222nd Infantry, found another group of surrendered SS. He marched them to a ditch. One by one, he executed them with his rifle. By the time the sun set on Dachau, the camp was liberated, and between 35 and 50 SS prisoners of war were dead, executed after they had surrendered. The professional revenge was complete. And the catastrophic failure was not one of equipment but of the human psyche. The system of military justice which had bent in Sicily had now completely shattered against the walls of Dachau, and then the cover-up began. The U.S. Army, horrified by what its own men had done, immediately clamped a lid on the story. They launched a secret investigation, officially titled Investigation of Alleged Mistreatment of German Guards at Dachau, known as the Weinstein Investigation. The report, compiled by Lt. Col. Joseph M. Weinstein, was meticulous. It confirmed the killings. It named the officers and enlisted men involved. It concluded that military discipline had utterly collapsed and recommended charges including murder against multiple soldiers, including Lt. Col. Sparks for failure to control his men and Private Curtin for pulling the trigger. The report landed on the desk of the theater's military governor, General Georges Patton. Patton's response was ice-cold and utterly predictable. He read the report, and in his private diary he raged, not at his men but at the investigators. He wrote that the SS guards were vile beasts and subhuman, and that the American soldiers had done the right thing. He summoned Lt. Col. Weinstein, the lead investigator, tore up the official letter of reprimand for Felix Sparks, the man who stopped the massacre, and threw it in the trash, telling him he was too good an officer to have his record blemished by this ... Patton buried the entire investigation. No one was ever charged for the Chinon massacre. No one was ever truly punished for the Biscari massacre. And no one would ever stand trial for the Dachau reprisals. The message from the top was unambiguous. The good war needed to remain good. The The public needed clean-cut heroes. The ugly, inconvenient truth of battlefield vengeance was bad for morale and bad for the history books. The files were sealed, and they would remain sealed for nearly 50 years. So what did the U.S. Army really do with SS prisoners? It's crucial to understand the contrast with the Soviet Union. The Soviet treatment of Axis prisoners was, in most cases, a matter of cold, calculated state policy. It was the systematic, industrialized vengeance of a nation that had endured 27 million dead, the Einsatzgruppen and the doctrine of Lebensraum. The Gulags, the starvation marshes, the mass executions of officers. This was a system. The American failure was the opposite. It was a failure of the system. It was a spontaneous, hot-blooded, and deeply human collapse in spite of official policy, in spite of training, and in spite of the law. The statistics prove the difference. Of the 3.1 million German soldiers captured by the Soviets, more than 1 million never returned. Of the 7.6 million captured by the Western Allies, the US, Britain, and France, the death rate was less than 1%. But this story isn't about statistics. It's about psychology. The legacy of Mamadi is that it gave American soldiers a moral permission slip to abandon their own morality. The legacy of Dachau is the terrifying proof that even the most just liberators, when forced to confront an evil so absolute it defies language, can become infected by the very darkness they are fighting. This does not create an equivalence. It highlights a profound paradox. The U.S. Army was simultaneously in the very same location at Dachau, beginning the process of liberating camps and prosecuting Nazi war criminals in the Nuremberg trials, while quietly burying its own war crimes committed on the very same soil. The GIAs were not saints, they were men. Men who were pushed to a place where the rules no longer made sense. They were forced to look into the abyss, and on a few dark, terrible days, the abyss looked back. The good war was never that good. It was necessary, but it was not clean. It was brutal, filthy, and morally gray, like all wars. The American soldier of World War II did, in fact, liberate the world from a tyranny that threatened to extinguish human decency. That is an unassailable historical fact. But in the process of that liberation, they were dragged into the very same moral darkness. They proved that ordinary men are capable of extraordinary heroism, and when pushed by unimaginable horror of extraordinary cruelty, the story of what American GIs did to their SS prisoners does not diminish the righteousness of their victory. It humanizes it. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable, complex truth that war is never a clean fight between good and evil. It is, and always will be, a desperate struggle within the human soul itself. If you believe that real history is found not in the comfortable myths, but in the difficult, challenging, and often ugly details, then subscribe to our channel. We tell the stories that dare to look in the shadows.